Let's all go back to the movies as we talk about a film that's a sequel that's been 30 years in the making. In this video, we're gonna dive deep into the facts about the upcoming sequel, Heat 2. Let's get to it. Al Pacino as Vincent Hanna and Robert De Niro as Neil McCauley once sat across the table facing each other and changed the crime thriller forever. Now the world of Heat is coming back. Well, maybe not featuring those legendary actors from the original movie, but with something far more interesting in terms of plot and the characters. Michael Mann is a talented and diligent filmmaker who could have made a sequel to this film long ago if he wanted to, but he didn't. Instead, he took almost 30 years to bring it back on screen so that Heat would feel relevant once again. Now, I don't blindly believe the sequel is going to be good, but from what I've learned about the production, it seems very promising, to be honest. So I thought, why not share my excitement with you so that you know what to expect from the sequel? In today's video, we're gonna find out everything we know so far about Heat 2. So, without further ado, let's get started. This was never just a movie, it was a 16-year obsession. So, before we go into any more details about whether or not the sequel is happening or how it might turn out, we should first know the leader of the ship, the director of the film, Michael Mann. Now, unlike many other Hollywood giants, Michael Mann doesn't quickly move from one project to another. If you look at his entire career, you see him returning and refining his works over the years. Apart from just Heat, we have seen him deliver some of the greatest crime thrillers, like Collateral and The Insider, and even the TV show Miami Vice. These movies are very realistically grounded, and it's evident in each one that this man likes to do extensive research and precise technical planning before jumping into a project, and perhaps Heat 2 has taken this long just because of that. So the story of Heat actually began back in 1979 when Michael Mann wrote the original script based on a real-life Chicago event involving a police officer named Chuck Adamson and a criminal named Neil McCauley. Adamson hunted Neil down and even had a face-to-face conversation that inspired one of the most legendary sequences in cinematic history. Yes, I'm talking about the famous coffee shop scene between Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. Well, the script was not just about that. Initially, it wasn't even thought of as a film. Mann actually tried to turn this script into a TV project, which became LA Takedown. The script was designed as a pilot for the show, and it followed the same plot as the film, a cop and a criminal moving towards a final confrontation. But then the project faced a major crisis over budget, time, and cast issues. The main problem was that the cast didn't align with what Mann had envisioned for his characters' looks or personalities. They lacked that gravity and screen presence that Mann was looking for. Although it aired in 1989, the response wasn't satisfactory at all. Mann decided to wait and watch what he could do with this project, and after reworking the material and adding more psychological depth to the characters, he finally turned it into a film in 1995, starring two of Hollywood's most legendary actors. And then, as we all know, Heat made history, not just as a successful film at the box office, but it also became an example of how to direct a crime thriller. The scenes that made it untouchable. We can't just talk about Heat and the possible sequel of the film without admiring some of the best sequences in the movie, because otherwise, there's no point in making this video. Basically, we gotta talk about these two particular scenes in this movie to just let you know what a masterpiece it was. So, if the upcoming sequel somehow messes it up, you'll know why fans will be pissed off for real. These two sequences are contradictory. One is extremely calm, but with an intense undertone, and the other is chaotic but meticulously shot. Together, they made the film. So, let me start with the diner scene first. This is the moment where Al Pacino and Robert De Niro sit across from each other, sharing screen for the very first time. Because even though in Godfather 3 they appeared, they never really shared a scene in that film. Heat gave them that opportunity for the first time. The scene was shot at a real restaurant, Kate Matalini, late at night, around 1 a.m., and it was not on an artificial set. The lighting was real and an authentic background, as Mann wanted it to look very realistic. Even the extras you see are not the professional background actors. They were simply the restaurant staff. Even though the technicality of that scene looked simple, Mann actually planned it pretty carefully. He didn't let the actors rehearse much, as he wanted their candid expressions on that point, as the script demanded it, you can see how Pacino totally gets into the character and not just converses with De Niro, but watches his body language, just like an investigator would do with his targeted criminal. But even at that sequence, the dialogue is pretty tough. Both of these characters are just doing their jobs, and even though there's a question of morality, it's pretty mundane for both of them. You can see the exhaustion and uncertainty in both of their eyes, and Pacino and De Niro were masters at portraying those emotions. Also, the fact that those conversations came from the actual encounter between real-life Adamson and McCauley is so freaking enthralling. Well, in the next sequence, the downtown shootout, the intensity stays, but the calmness is gone. It is, by far, one of the most studied action sequences, and let me tell you why. First of all, this whole action sequence was shot on the streets of LA using real locations. The use of blank sounds and the bullets hitting cars and walls were all created physically on set. A former Special Air Service agent named Andy McNabb was hired to train the actors. Even Val Kilmer, who played Chris Shiherlis, was known for his tactical reload that has become iconic ever since. Then we also saw the expertise of cinematographer Dante Spinotti, who shot the entire sequence in natural lighting, which makes it look so realistic on screen. Michael Mann made it happen, and since then, Heat has become influential in cinematic history. Even Christopher Nolan openly admits that Heat actually inspired him to create the brooding action scenes of The Dark Knight, and that's why, even 30 years later, these two sequences still matter for both the franchise's process and the whole genre of action thriller. The book that blew everything open again. Michael Mann didn't try to make a sequel right away. Instead, he spent 6 years writing a novel as a sequel and a prequel to Heat, naming the book Heat 2. He co-wrote the novel with crime author Meg Gardiner and published it in 2022, which immediately became a New York Times bestseller. So yeah, Mann already set the stage and built anticipation for a sequel, and fans are ready to take it once more. And talking about the book, it was everything you could ask for. Plot and character-wise, the story was a whole package. So, first of all, the novel is not a simple continuation. It expands the story in a pretty complicated way, but keeps the grounds clear. Like, there are some time periods, and the narrative shifts back and forth, sometimes in 1988 or 95, and then 96 and 2000 as well. So this was not a linear story to begin with, which would remind you of Godfather 2, where the prequel and sequel simultaneously go in one single movie. Looked like Mann wanted to achieve something like that. The locations go beyond Los Angeles and move through Chicago, Mexico, Paraguay, and some parts of Southeast Asia. From just being a city-based story, this sequel is screaming a globetrotting experience as it seems. Actually, too many time jumps are the reason why there are so many locations in this story. Like the 1988 sections are set in Chicago, where you see a younger version of Neil McCauley, including a young Chris Shiherlis. You can also get Victor Hanna early in his career, who's building his reputation in the Chicago PD. Here's the most interesting thing. Both of these main guys are roaming around in the same city, yet they don't know each other. Well, this, as you can see, is the prequel part of the story. While in the sequel, Chris remains the only surviving crew member after the failed robbery, and in the novel, we see him in Mexico trying to get back on his feet. At the same time, Victor Hanna is in the picture because his cat and mouse chase didn't end with McCauley's death, as he's now after a bigger criminal network with much stronger and newer enemies. The novel is heavy in both terms of volume and the material it deals with, and it absolutely works as background material for the upcoming sequel. The studio war, the deal, and the team behind it. Now comes the most crucial aspect of a production, the budget, which sometimes becomes a big obstacle in an artist's or a filmmaker's creative pursuit. Michael Mann had to face some big issues regarding the budget of the film. He's always known for his big-scale action thrillers that need multiple sets and detailed production design. So, without a big budget, the sequel could have been incomplete. In early 2025, after finishing the script, Mann approached Warner Brothers to back his film, and the initial budget he proposed was around $230 million. Warner Brothers was not interested in spending so much money, so they started negotiations with him. Mann tried to find a middle ground and lower the budget to $170 million, but Warner Brothers still considered it a hefty amount. So, on their part, they put a proposition. They would like to spend $150 million for this project if there were at least 2 sequels, at least for this movie. And that is where Mann drew the line. He's not always commercially consistent. so it's kinda impossible for him to deliver back-to-back sequels and make a franchise out of it. By August 2025, Mann had begun scouting additional production houses, and Warner Brothers finally walked away from the project. Meanwhile, Sony and Paramount were also considered, but in the end, Amazon MGM Studios, especially its United Artists division, took its responsibility. And it turned out that Amazon is not going to compromise on its theatrical release before its online streaming, with MGM greenlighting the project. The whole creative team was also confirmed. Jerry Bruckheimer joined the team as a producer who previously produced massive-scale films like Top Gun Maverick and Pirates of the Caribbean. Also, famous names like Eric Roth, Nick Nesbitt, Scott Stubber, and many more people are involved in the project. In the Lumiere Festival in Lyon, Michael has directly announced the official status of Heat 2. He clarified that they are aiming for a wide theatrical release in the US and all over the world. However, there will be some technical changes as well, as Mann has talked about using AI to create the aged looks of the characters. Yeah, nothing is yet so sure about the technicalities, but it seems like Michael is open to all sorts of ideas and technological modifications that can enhance the beauty of Heat 2. DiCaprio and Bale are in, but nobody's saying who they're playing. For a big-budget, high-octane action thriller like Heat 2, the casting choice is required to be very strong, and Michael Mann did not compromise on that. For a long time, when Heat 2 was just in talks, we knew big names like Leonardo DiCaprio and Christian Bale were involved as main leads, but then it wasn't a confirmed story. However, in some recent interviews and official announcements, both of them have confirmed their involvement in the movie. First of all, DiCaprio recently stated in one of his interviews, "This is very much its own movie. We're still working on it. We're a ways away from production. It tips its hat to Heat, but it's an homage, and it picks up the story from there. It's set in the future and the past, from that pivotal moment in what I think is the great crime noir film of my lifetime." This statement alone gives a lot of credibility to this film, not just because DiCaprio is in it, but also because of how important he thinks it's going to be. Same for Christian Bale, as on February 24th, 2026, he just casually told the reporter Jake Hamilton that he would be back in Chicago soon for Heat 2. However, we still don't know which characters they are going to play in the sequel. Bale previously worked with Michael almost 17 years ago on the film Public Enemies, and now he's going to be back under Mann's direction once again. There's a high chance Bale would be cast as a younger version of Vincent Hanna at the early stages of his career, but that's just one of the many assumptions we have regarding his part. Even DiCaprio, whose involvement is probably going to be a big deal, has not revealed yet whom he's actually going to play in the film. In response to this question, he said that they are still in the middle of a discussion, but fans had already assumed that DiCaprio might play Chris's older version in the sequel portion of the film. We might see him as Chris in Mexico, trying to make a living or plotting his schemes to come back into the criminal world. Everyone circling the film and the shadow Val Kilmer left behind. On top of everything, there are more than just two big names if you look into the possible cast list of the movie. There are many names that may or may not appear in the official cast list, but I'll tell you anyway. So, starting with Adam Driver, because he was considered to play a young version of McCauley since early 2023. It was even heard that Driver was trying to adjust his schedule for the role, but we don't have any official information on his involvement in the project. And then Stephen Graham, whom you know from Irishman and Peaky Blinders, is also in talks for an undisclosed role. Also, Austin Butler, Bradley Cooper, and Ana de Armas are possible mentions as an ensemble, although no official confirmation is out yet. Presumably, Al Pacino can be seen as an older version of Vincent Hanna, which might be appropriate for the movie, but again, it is still a speculation. While these speculations went on for years, the team lost one of their gems, Val Kilmer. Val Kilmer passed away on April 1st, 2025 at the age of 65. He had been dealing with throat cancer for years and pneumonia, which was reported as the immediate cause of death. Val Kilmer's contribution to this character is still unshakable, so if DiCaprio or whoever is going to take the role remembers the weight carried by the character, perhaps they can try to do some justice to Kilmer's legacy. So, when does this actually come out? Last but not least, the production has already been greenlit, and the team is targeting an early August start to principal photography in 2026. So we can expect that by the year 2027, production, and likely post-production, will be finished. and perhaps by late 2027 or early 2028, Heat 2 will hit the theaters and repeat history once more. On that note, all I can say is that when a film is so influential, continuing its legacy after so long is not an easy decision, and Michael Mann deliberately taking that risk says a lot about his endeavors. So, crossing my fingers, I'm having high hopes that this one is probably going to be the most talked about film of the coming years. However, this video is over right here. If you enjoyed the discussion, let us know in the comments, drop a like, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!